Hello, good evening over the chair. We have here one of our discussions with artists at the MIG 21 KIBLIX festival. So I will introduce Michal Seta, Ali de la Puente, Adam Donovan, Špela Petrič, and Robertina Šabjanič. And so, any questions from the audience? Okay, no questions. Thank you very much. Finished.
That was nice and short. Thank you very much.
So just by talking about migrations, by movement, by changing, by interfering, interlacing, overgoing or whatever, let's say, Robertina, your work has to do with migrations?
Hello. So, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And it's really nice company of people which I have here. I'm really flattered and happy. So migrations and underwater noise are very, very connected. Actually, I will start with the short description of the project. It's dealing, I was recording for a few years different underwater situations, underwater sounds in the seas and oceans. And I was trying to figure it out what's happening with the human impact, what is the sound of bioacoustics and so on. So actually the compositions, which you can hear also at one of the rooms here in KIBLA Portal, it's sound composition done through these different archives, sound archives. And also tonight with Michal Ziegler, when we will be performing, I will perform actually these sounds. The migration part is actually through this traffic which is happening on everyday basis, and in the last 50 years the traffic of the industry and so on, it raised for 150%, and is damaging the environment, is damaging also is cutting the sound of the communication of the different animals in the seas and so on. So there's like big environmental impact on different ecological niches of the species, which they are trying to move them somewhere else. So it's pushing lots of different animals to get into migration mode. It's more like this, it's not like migration directly, but it's like dealing with all this, also with our human constant migration of daily traffic, industrialization, and working not so good on our environment, actually.
Thank you. And where, at which parts of the globe you recorded that sounds?
So the sounds that have been recorded in Northern Sea, in Bergen, in Norway, in Roscoff in France, in Atlantic Sea, in Slovenian coast, Adriatic Sea, Koper, Capodistria, then it was in Dubrovnik in Adriatic Sea, and then also in Izmir, Turkey, Aegean Sea. So it's mostly like European seas, and it's interesting map of that, and I hope to have chance and opportunity to go to record some other seas, oceans, rivers, places.
Špela, so what is your issue of migration, moving, and in the work that you're showing at KIBLA?
The work is actually just going to open tomorrow night in Kibela, so in KIBLA, at the other location. It's called Phytoteratology, and it's a project where I conceive plant monsters, and they're monsters because there's a hybridity going on between humans and plants. So I'll get back to that in a bit, but the point of departure for my interest in plants actually has a lot to do with the general affect of migration, which is sort of a fear of this foreign other. And when thinking about who to look for this alien in our environment, the absolute one, not just another person, not just animals, but perhaps something that we may try to understand, but will always fail to really emotionally connect to. They're plants. So plants are, at the moment, in this philosophical discourse, appearing as this other. That is a relevant topic to discuss the differences and similarities. So I've been exploring the topic of plants now for several years. Also, so actually one of the first projects I did in connection to plants was with Robertina, Šabjanič, the humaga, and already then we were proposing trans-species of human and algae. But I think through the years I have turned more and more to this materialism of the possible exchange. So to sort of not speculate about the possible interconnections between humans and plants, but to sort of cut through their absolute exteriority with a connection that has always been there ever since we actually parted in plants and animals and so forth. So the project is about conceiving plant embryos using biotechnological protocols. But I myself take this on and use my hormones, steroid hormones that I isolate from the urine in this conception. So these baby plants have been imprinted with these molecules of information that come from my body. And I'm claiming that these plants are not just plants, that they're plant-human hybrids in a way. Because I know that everybody would say, well, if I created a plant with my genes, then you could totally call it a plant-human hybrid, right, somehow. But I'm addressing this post-genomic era, or let's get rid of this genetic essentialism and think about the many ways that we come into being in connection to each other, how we are shaped by one another. So plants are definitely at this edge of comprehensibility, which I think, coming back to the questions of migrations, which are often perceived as something invasive, something threatening. The question is, how do you see yourself in someone else? What are the tools that you have at hand? And how can you overcome perhaps this very, very primitive lizard brain, which is based on emotions, which is based on very sentimental effects? And I don't know, maybe it's just a way of framing that we ultimately do have to use this sentiment, right? Because with phytoteratology, I'm coming back precisely to this, to the mothering instinct, because I've done other excursions and have somehow felt a bit unchanged, which was very strange after this immense effort. So it's an ongoing process.
Just one more, but don't you think we are all both since the beginning, like animals and plants, like we have more than 90% of DNA in common?
Yeah, well, is it DNA that we're talking about? I mean, yeah.
On some level, yeah.
For sure. I mean, I think that much like technology is the result of an excess of the human species, us humans, as well as everything else, is kind of an excess of plants, right? Because they're the ones that were able to make organic substances from the energy of the sun. So we're there thanks to them, and they have kind of let go of much of their biomass to enable us. So I think that's also an interesting relation. Then how do we at the brink of our technology becoming its own entity, you know, how do we understand that relationship, that at one point we might be just what plants are to us now, to the technology to come. Well, yeah, but that's another issue.
Thank you. So, Adam, just this move now to technology, because comparing to bio work, your work is, let's say, robotic. And what do you have this, I don't know, attitude to technology that it will somehow surpass the humanity or the living or whatever could be this called?
The hope of new technology, I guess. This is thinking about this in my work, this idea of empathy in the machines and the machine being an extension of yourself, and this hope for living forever. I guess that there's a little touch of that in there. It's more also remembering these machines that I grew up with in the Australian landscape. And I like to kind of fantasize that they're also dreaming of me now, somehow. And, you know, this idea of attaining special abilities through being able to manufacture technology, and that's also part of the work, why they're made this way. They're made by machines.
And so how can you somehow see your work in the context of migrations? Because your sound moves, your machine moves, put those machines also move on some longer distances without human control.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I like to think about recently, like deep learning and how that eventual process will play out. And I think that's an important reason to try and reappropriate this kind of technology so that perhaps it develops some empathy as well, like us, as an extension of us. And as far as migration goes, I mean, that they are, in a sense, me looking at the concept of empathy again, and you know, how do we fix the world's problems in a way, trying to create experiences for people where they can live out certain experience, awakenings, if you like, and the power of music and art and motion to be able to do that. I mean, that comes out of reading a lot of Tomaž Dobrila. I once heard him say, well, to a question, the question was, what do you think the solution to the world's problems are? And he said, the solution to the problem, if I thought there was a problem, was not so much in trying to find a solution to a problem, but rather having a solution to not having a solution.
Or not having a problem. So, Ali, your work at KIBLIX in KIBLA is, I would say, some kind of iconical in the way that you are showing the particles which are looking quite familiar, but on the other hand, what was the human influence on that movement that you're projecting? Or how it was produced?
The last part I did.
How was the movement of these particles, of these balls on your projection that you produced with?
Okay, well, hello, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Oh, yeah, like that? Okay. Well, that video work is called Nuclear Cartography, And my thinking was about how we delimit a cartography. And a cartography is made out of relations of limits. And every limit is changing. Like we define the limits as, like, for example, the limits of how we get inside of the sea and how we introduce the sounds there, or this the difference of the naming, like the other is the plant or is the human, and it's all these things. But it's more like a cartography of relation, and then we decide how it is. And the nuclear thing, these little balls are this kind of representation of the minimum of the atom or even subatomic particles, and the idea of how they are moved. They are in the process of doing the video. Actually, they are moved by just blowing out, like very softly, taking out like an exhalation. And it's not that sound because it's something that you don't see. It's this part of more having a reference to mythology also, but also to creative, to maybe there's something moving things that we don't know. And when we think about migrations, we think about migrations because there are borders. No? But the borders, we decide the border. If we move the border, there's no migration. There is, but the movement will be always there. So the idea, it was looking of how it is formed through some external force and how it becomes different cartographies through the movement. And so in a way you can see maps, but also people moving or something else. No, it depends. It's more abstract process to try to find out what was it. No?
Yeah, because might be, I don't know, the only source or energy for movement is basically electromagnetic field. So that's why everything turns in a way. So if we look at some kind of natural way, it's on some perspective. But what you mean about it?
So I didn't hear well.
That about turning, like your particles in the work. Yeah.
See, the thing is that they move through blowing, but at the same time, this material reacts to this movement. They create kind of a magnetic field, like electricity between them. So in a way, some they stay, some they move, some they. It's different, and it was an exploration of actually how everything moves and how everything is passing by, and sometimes it's the same particle. You can tell like how it's the behavior, for example, of an electron or a positron or a muon or a quark, or we know some part of their behavior, but sometimes they behave in a different way and we don't know why, and we're still searching for that. So that's kind of an interpretation in more in a material way.
Thank you very much. Michal, your work is interactive in like everything is and everybody is, but also is unpredictable interaction, has to do some with lights, a lot with sounds. So, yes.
Yeah, so I will also take this opportunity to thank KIBLA for taking the work, and especially since it came at the last minute, and Robertina was behind that as well. And this is a European premiere of Recollect, so thank you very much. In case of Recollect, I think that it's the work itself that is the migrant, and it actually depends on its migration, so being shown in different spaces, in different contexts, in order for it to be interesting. And the fact that it's hopefully interesting right now is that it has already visited several different places and has collected memories. Because the concept behind this work is memory and the degradation of memory, and how new memories can be affected by previous memories. So it's there is actually nothing scientific about it. In terms, the memory here is represented by a sound. And so it will record sounds in different locations, in some circumstances, and it will play them back, and it will also intentionally modify them to show this degradation. But of course, the memories will be affected by previous recordings that were made somewhere else, because the work also records itself with the new memories. And so we get this layers of different memories from different places that are sort of tainted by the new memories, or new memories are tainted by the old memories. And all this really depends on the different locations for the work as it travels.
Thanks. And then how much is your work on some, how much it uses some random interactivity, some delayed interactivity, or also do you have your work as a living organism?
There are two mechanisms that provide the randomness. There is one kind of a weighted random for selection of playback of sound, and there is another one that governs the recording of sound. And the mechanism that acts as a trigger for a recording is actually controlled by the people who are visiting, who are in the space. And so it's this random movement of people that provides the data for the algorithm to decide when it will start a new recording.
Thank you. Do you think it's a living organism?
I wouldn't say it's a living organism, but at the same time, I wasn't really interested in any kind of artificial intelligence or anything like this. We just wanted a simple way to fill the space with light and sound that could, in some kind of poetic way, represent this movement of memory from being a clear memory of something to being completely convoluted and tainted by its experience in a certain way. So it has a mind of its own in a sense, because at the same time it follows different stages throughout the day. When it's being interacted with, it behaves in a certain way. When it's not being interacted with, it behaves in a different way. And then when the non-interaction has lasted for a very long time, then it falls asleep and makes a little bit of cleaning up, in the memory banks, and then something wakes it up, and then it will start again. So in that sense, yes, but there is very little intelligence behind.
Thank you. So, second chance. Any questions? Kakšna vprašanja? If there are no questions, so you made the second mistake. We will start now another round, and then will be again the question. Any questions? If not, we will continue until you won't have any questions.
So we are going to torture them?
And us, yeah. So, please, just maybe one more question. What of course, it's a very simple one, but what does interactivity mean to you in a sense of your work, your, let's say, attitude to your environment and your attitude to yourself?
The interactivity. This you mean like in the interaction? Like, okay. Like for me, interactivity is always used mostly as a tool in the sense of understanding of, if I speak about interactive technology. But then interaction in sense of communication, and especially I try to work on visual step into zoomusicology, which is more like a step into this interspecies communication, but also to push through that also the other species, not only us, have the construct of not only the sound, but also the song. Because there is a big difference between these two ideas. And this interactivity in sense of communication is very present in this like living system, species, and so on. And it could be through sound, it could be through chemistry, like before Špela was mentioning, like when you work with plants, they do definitely communicate, but definitely absolutely differently than we are used to and what we do, and so on. So I see interactivity more like that, you know, it's like a tool connection and something to work on to connect with different species and trying to push this kind of like interspecies understanding also. Maybe like that.
Špela, how do you mean that you can, let's say, influence the species you're dealing with, and is that the basic interactivity, or can you measure it when you influence with your presence or with your touch some other cells?
Yeah, measurement is a scientific tool. And so I'm not necessarily so much interested in measurement, because you fall into the trap of having to prove that this is in fact happening. And it's a bit problematic anyway, especially when it comes to plants which are immobile, which is the first reason why they're sort of so strange. Their time scale is very, very slow, and they move by growing and by assimilating. But what was specifically your question?
Just your influence or interaction with cells that you're doing with them.
The influence. So I've thought a lot about how one can influence the plant and how one can know that the plant is influenced by them. And a lot of times we employ interfaces that sort of allow this transfer to happen. So be it time lapse that sort of takes the plant time and sort of speeds it up, so we are able to observe things, or we stick electrodes in plants to see the level where their molecular processes are actually happening at our speeds. And I wanted to avoid that as much as possible, because interfaces have their own subjugation employed. So ultimately you're interacting more with the interface, something that is very commonplace, and the plant is just another thing. It could be a computer, it might as well be. So if you get rid of the interfaces, then something strange happens, which is the ultimate submission to the plant as it is, and to try to find the possible intersection between humans and plants. I turned to this developing field of biosemiotics. So it takes the principles of semiotics, of what a sign is, what is the interpretant, what is the object, and looks at signs that are found in non-human interactions between entities. And molecules are such signs, or some physical phenomena can be such signs. So when you look at the interaction between humans and plants, and I did this performance, Scotopoesis, where we were performing, me and the cress, intercognition. And it's not just about interaction. Interaction is actually a very much colonized word, and I wanted to avoid that. And intercognition means the integration of these sensory processes. however they occur, either in human, and we maybe think alike, but definitely the plant doesn't think like me. But this gap of understanding is present both ways. I don't know what's happening in the plant, and the plant doesn't know what's happening in me, and yet there are some signs that we can transmit to each other. So I was standing in front of cress that was germinating, this watercress. You put it on a bread, I'd say, for 19 hours, and being illuminated from the back, so I was throwing a shadow as I was facing it. And in these 19 hours, the cress changed morphology. The one that was in the shadow, it became tall and pale. It was trying to grow into the light, and it escaped my shadow. So after the 19 hours, I stepped away, and there was this imprint of my shadow, and I said, aha, you see, it happened. That was the proof. And of course, you could say, well, but you could have been just a cutout. But I wasn't. I was submitting myself to surrendering to the plant by doing this. And it took a lot of effort, because it's trying to deny this, essential animalistic drive to movement. Look at me as I'm explaining. And there I was trying to stand as still as possible. And with the phytoteratology, this symbol, this signal, is these hormones. The hormones that we actually share, both plants and animals, are the same molecules materially, but their meaning is different. So biosemiotics eventually says that it's not about the sign, it's about the interpretant. And here I'm playing with the fact that I have something that the plant can, in fact, interpret. Not at this moment, it's probably ill communication, but if I were to continue this for centuries, perhaps the plant would know. I mean, even now, there is definitely a change in its cell, and its morphology, cellular structure, probably epigenetics that takes place based on the fact that I'm administering these hormones. I'm trying so hard, but I can't see the effect. And that is also part of this, the fact that plants are so cryptic. But I don't have to prove that this is happening, because the scientists have already done this. So they know that human steroid hormones affect plants in different ways, but they're of course doing it. Okay, we test progesterone, we test testosterone, we test estrogen at different concentrations in different stages, etc. And I'm just basically taking everything. They're actually steroid metabolites, and exposing the plant, exposing the embryos to this, hoping that they carry a memory of at least of a part of me. Now this is very human, right? So I'm caught in this circle of construction and deconstruction, and I think it's probably precisely what has to happen in this relation.
You mentioned also, the plant's time.
Yeah.
How different is to let's say humans' time?
Well, you can have easily trees that are 800 or years old, 800 years. But then somehow they are also very fast in responding to, let's say, even a surge of CO2. Their leaf will grow, but it will grow in really tiny, tiny amounts. So they're sort of very vivacious, but imperceptible to us. And basically, one of the differences between humans and plants is also that they perpetually grow and assimilate. We sort of have this moment when we're born, and then we have this, we grow up and grow old, and we die in full circle. And then we have offspring, perhaps, or we don't. And with the plants, it seems that they are just perpetually growing. Sometimes they would vegetatively reproduce, and there would be no discontinuation in this one entity. So this is one of the things that might be a bit frightening to us. It kind of connects to the concept of cloning very sort of softly, but so plant time is slower and longer.
Thank you very much, Adam. So how big role has time in your work?
Time?
Yeah. I mean artistically, not just passing by and you getting nicer and...
It's a good question. I guess in the dream state there is this frozen sense of time, if you like, free-floating non-time. So I like to think with the interaction of the work that people can explore and perhaps get into this state of, I guess, nowness or something like that, you know?
Alice, so as we see on your video, your particles are always fluctuating. So is there any pattern behind them, or it's just some unrecognition, and again, how much time has the influence on your work? Time.
Well, time is my subject, actually. Time is actually my subject of since more than 20 years ago. And the idea of how it's in terms of migration, for example, if in terms of movement, do we move in time or we move in space? Or time moves through us or space moves through us? Like we have like a perception of being still, like even here, sitting, but we are moving. We're moving with the Earth, we're moving with the solar system, we're moving with the whole universe, and there's some other movements that goes in our body and movements that comes across our bodies, so there's never this stillness. But this is also in time affection. So it's something that is continuously going. So in terms of time on this idea of particles, they seem to be still, but there's always a sensation of connection and relation and how they are preparing to the next movement. But it's never stillness. So I think maybe it's not. It's about the conception of moving toward the future, or the future is passing through us to become past, or it's not us that we are moving, it's time that is moving, or it's us that we are moving in time and space. So all these kind of ideas here are about what I'm trying to address in this search of something that maybe will ever be known for reality.
Thank you. So, Michal, your installation is somehow time-based, but also it's a space installation. So, what would you define in this your relation of your work by using the spatial dimension and using the time dimension?
Well, the time and space are somehow related, right? And so in this particular case, on a very elementary level, the time is the duration of a sound event, right? But that's like a very simple way. But on a bigger scale, the piece is actually timeless. It does not depend on time. It just depends on different types of environment and different types of interactions. And so in this sense, it really depends on space, in the sense that the space, and particularly the acoustic space, has an influence on the sound quality of the recording and then playback. And so this is something that we have noticed with the piece after about two installations, is that the new recordings are tainted by the acoustic print of a previous space. And so this was something that we haven't really taken into consideration when conceiving the piece, but it became kind of a byproduct of this context. We install it in one space, which has a certain acoustic characteristic, and we import it to another place, and suddenly the new recordings are tainted by the previous acoustic, or vice versa. And it's particularly interesting when the previous acoustic space is played or even recorded with the current acoustic space, and so this is where the actual nuance of the piece comes in play, is when you actually listen carefully to some of the things that are being played back. You will realize that you hear a kind of reverberation that is impossible here, and so it must come from somewhere else, and there is no artificial reverberation in the piece. So of course in this sense space and time are closely related, because, well, the time of the reverberation and the time of a delay and things like that are of course affected by the actual acoustic space.
Thank you very much. It's your third chance to have questions. If not,
when will you start with the performance?
Hvala. No, Michal Seta ima tukaj že en tingli inštalacijo ali dele Puente v Kibli. Adam Donovan je tudi tam zadaj, Špela Petrič ima jutri otvoritev v Kibli ob 6. Robertina Šabjanič pa bo z Michom Ciglerjem imela tudi nocoj performance, drugače ima pa tam svojo inštalacijo, tako da vabljeni. Adam Donovan pa pol ti, ne? Evo, pa pridite še kaj. Thank you very much.
Thank you.